JJ the CPA here, hope you're doing well. Ethics involved with PPP, and it's not what you think. This isn't a discussion about, well, not all of it's a discussion about should you help your client achieve full forgiveness in the sense of finding a way for it to happen. What I'm talking about is the ethics of the CPA, the EA, tax pro, but specifically for CPAs and EAs that are specifically under the authority, in essence, of Circular 230. So here's the thing. Is PPP forgiveness the amount that's forgiven under Circular 230? Yes or no? Because I've used that in the past to determine if something was a legal service or not. And if it's not going to be under the authority of Circular 230, okay, or the like with the state, then I'm not doing it because it's not under, in essence, tax work, right? If somehow doesn't feed up to Circular 230. So what you want to consider then is, as you're walking through, and I wrote something up here, and it's from a couple of slides from FutureCast. It's a seminar that I do and write for Surgent. And so I'm just sharing two slides here that I wrote that I'll be talking further about. But the ethics of PPP forgiveness. And you got to remember, when we're talking ethics CPA side, right, we all know that it's a different kind. It's not ethics as in we're assuming wrongdoing or we're trying to learn how to not do something wrong, right? But what I like about ethics continuing professional education, and I've taught ethics to CPAs around the country on behalf of Surgeon. And most of the time when I'm visiting with CPAs, we all have an idea of ethics, right? We have an idea of it. So this is kind of a new one, right? Because we're dealing with the ethics of the PPP forgiveness process. So the first thing to think through is on your ethics is, how are you determining your qualifications as it relates to your determining PPP forgiveness? What are your qualifications for doing that? Because we all know that we need to have proper qualifications to do something, right? Is it just because it's in a law that includes tax that we now feel qualified? I'm just asking. I don't know the answer for you. Were you a CPA, EA, tax pro? Were you hired to do PPP work? Okay. Does your engagement letter indicate that your scope of services includes the determination of forgiveness on a debt? Because that's in essence what this is. Have you been properly engaged by your client? Have you approached them and properly give them an engagement letter to provide these services related to PPP forgiveness or to provide advice? Okay, and if you haven't, then maybe this is just hey, get an engagement letter to your client, right? Maybe you just review your qualifications and go, yeah, you know what, I'm qualified for this. I'm going to go ahead and here's an engagement letter on it, right? But typically, think of this. Typically, and I am looking at my slides, but typically a CPA's approach in providing tax services is to be the client's advocate, right? So we're taking on that approach with our clients every day of the week. But with PPP forgiveness, if we're being an advocate, the way that we're an advocate on their taxes, are those the same thing? Okay? I don't think that they are, in the sense that we're an advocate to save our clients the money that they've already made themselves and reduce down so that they don't pay any more or any less than the tax that they owe on the money that they made. This is money that was given to the client, and now there's a determination of how much of the government's money to give back. Kind of a different approach, right? So do we approach that in the same way? Is it ethical to approach it in the same way? Now we provide tax advice, and I don't know how everybody does it, but I don't give tax advice on technicalities. Okay, what are technicalities? I think right? It's a smirk test. Something that this isn't actually how it's supposed to work, but because technically you did this and technically you did that, then technically you get to write that off. I don't know. I don't provide advice on technicalities. Don't get me wrong. I understand that it's like, well, did you place it in service? Did you pay for it? What's the business use? Okay. Then you get to write it off. That's not well, then technically you get to write it off, right? I mean, this would be an example of a technicality, okay? And maybe you provide advice like this. And I'm not even saying it's a bad thing, okay? I don't know you, but it's something that I learned from my grandfather, Omar Abbott Slater, CPA. But, do you tell a client, hey, like, go ahead and buy that refrigerator. Go ahead and put it in your business, okay? Right there at the end of December, okay? You wrote it, you bought it, you place it in service, boom. You're gonna be able to write that off, okay? And you take bonus depreciation, write off 100% of it. So yeah, you got to write it off. So what happens the next year if you tell the client, technically we already took the write-off, so technically you could just take that refrigerator home, and technically it can just still be an asset of the business, and technically we could take it off the books because if we fully depreciated it, right, we're just gonna debit accumulated depreciation, we're gonna credit the asset, boom, comes right off the books, clean as a whistle. Technically we did everything correctly. It was just, you just decided you didn't need the refrigerator more. That'd be that'd be a technicality that someone got to write off a refrigerator. And you'd be like, well, that's a damn great CPA and EA. Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is. All I'm saying is, do you give advice on technicalities? Because in essence, to help your client achieve full forgiveness in the way that I've been reading is all on technicalities. Technicalities of, we'll let everybody go on PUA and then bring them back in the final 2 weeks, give everybody raises, share the spoils, everybody's back up. So technically you made it work, right? Technically is not the spirit of what you know the law to be, okay? So should you be providing advice on technicalities on increasing PPP forgiveness? Is that under Circular 230? Do you have any authority on it? And then with whom do CPAs and EAs have authority to represent their clients before? Right? Do you have authority to represent your client before a bank, before the FDIC or the SBA? Now, I understand that your client can say, hey, Jimmy, Sally, come on with me, would you? Will you come sit with me? And you know these numbers better than I do. But do you hold any authority with what you're telling that bank, or if the FDIC or the SBA, directly or indirectly? If you have a Form 2848, does that apply to banks and FDIC and SBA? It only applies to the IRS, right? This isn't done with the IRS. The forgiveness portion is not. Did you sign the SBA application for PPP funds with your client? No, right? First of all, it's a loan. Do you sign any loan documents with your clients? Okay. Will you sign the documents with your client presenting the request for loan forgiveness? Are you signing off on it? And I don't even mean like I'd sign off on it, but I'm saying, where do you sign off on it? There is not a spot that I would be aware of where you would say, I sign off on this, okay? Like we do on a tax return. Tax return, we're like, yep, I prepared this, okay? Maybe in the final analysis, there will be a form that you can say, yep, it was prepared by this third party, blah, 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 blah. But are you gonna sign that form? I'm not, right? I mean, I don't know what the client's done or not done and in this regard. This is money that came from the government. I'm just not sure. Is the client relying on your advice? But will the bank follow it? Will the SBA consider your opinion? Okay, so let's just say you do the calculation with your client. You're like, hey, here's a calculation. Here's how you can determine your forgiveness. And then SBA changes something, or they go in and turns out, even though the calculation's correct, the information that went into it isn't going to line up. Then what happens? Like what? You don't have software that you can rely on. Okay, and even if software comes out, or a bank gives it to you, or the SBA comes out with software, and you throw the numbers in, you're like, well, I calculated that. Okay, but all I'm saying is, if you calculate a number, what does that really hold? You're not providing what you came up with. You're not providing your form that you prepared that's not even out yet to the SBA, to the bank, right? Where like a tax return, and tax return has instructions, right? And we're familiar with it and we're going to sign off on it. But, if you're like anybody else, that prepares a return, you're like, well, I prepared this based on what was presented to me. That's what the bank's saying. Hey, present it to us, and then we will calculate it. Not give us your calculation, and then we'll go with it. Now, the bank may say, hey, here's a spreadsheet, go ahead and fill that out, and then we're going to double check it. But do you see how it's completely different than doing a tax return? I do. And then just a last note, there were some CPAs, I don't know of any, I certainly didn't, but CPAs, tax professionals could have gotten a 1% fee from the bank. Doesn't cost the client anything. Not saying it's a bad thing. But if you did receive that, CPA firm, then you might want to consider, are there any independence issues? And I understand that, you're putting together documents that aren't under AICPA, they're not under GAAP, they're not being audited. Well, I don't do audits and I don't do reviews. But we're still required to have independence in circumstances that require us to have independence to ensure that we're providing information or advice properly. Think even with the IRS now, right? We have to provide it in a conflict interest, free of any conflict or interest. The IRS requires us to provide tax advice and services in a manner that is free from conflict of interest. So, my engagement letters actually include a conflict of interest waiver for those that are a married couple, that they understand that they're going to sign off on the waiver of conflict of interest. That's something that came back and came out in 2011, right? So we have to have independence depending on how you want to interpret it. But I'm just talking about, if you got that fee, do you have an independence issue if you're now helping them figure out how much is forgiven? And even if you're like, well, I don't know how any of that matters, here's my point. If PPP forgiveness and its calculation in the documents don't fall under Circular 230, they don't fall under the AICPA, they don't fall under GAAP or another recognized method besides GAAP, right? If it doesn't fall under that, then how in the world do you think that you should be involved with it? And our ethics are, we shouldn't be doing something for a client we're not qualified for. We shouldn't be doing something for a client we haven't been engaged to do. We shouldn't be doing something for a client that's considered potentially legal advice. We shouldn't be doing something for a client providing expert advice that we are not experts in. I think I could be an expert in this stuff for as much as I've read through it and talked about it and going live and answering questions, right? I could get up on the stand and say, yeah, I'm an expert on this, but I'm not getting involved in the calculation of PPP forgiveness. And so actually, I'm not worried about my client suing you. You may not be that worried about clients suing you. But I certainly don't want a client upset with me that I'm like, oh yeah, that should be all forgiven. And then ultimately it's not, because the calculation changed or SBA changed. But here's why I'm not actually doing it, okay? I'm not doing it because it is not what I do. It's not going to be something I do next year or the year after that or the year after that. It doesn't fall under any of the authorities that I work underneath. I don't have any authority, okay? I can't represent my client in court. Can't represent him before a police officer, right? Like an attorney can. I can represent my client before the Internal Revenue Service or before a state tax agency. But we have no authority as CPAs, EAs, tax pros in this. And so that should be your biggest indicator that you should not be providing services, in my opinion, related to the PPP forgiveness calculation and determining what the clients need and how to calculate it and all that. The banks are going to provide them that at some point. Here's the documents that we need. The banks are going to provide them. Here's the spreadsheet. Here's the calculation. And you know as well as I do, every bank seemed to have a little bit of a different spreadsheet, Excel spreadsheet that came to say, okay, we'll fill this out. Here's how we're doing it. I mean, even though all my clients got approved, every bank had a little different of what they wanted, what documents they wanted, and how it got calculated, and what was included and not included. So you don't even really have one way. I mean, even though the SBA came out and said you can't do this with 1099s, we know that there's plenty of people that got PPP monies based on 1099s they paid out. Right? And then the last thing that I'll leave you with is, have you actually considered, did your client get the right amount of PPP funds? Because if you are going to stay involved with it, start there. Because I'm hearing a lot, maybe that client actually got PPP funds that they actually didn't even deserve because the calculation was incorrect. So if you're going to get involved with it, then I'll just say this: you better start from the beginning and make sure that the amount that they actually got is consistent with how the SBA indicates how they got it. And then get yourself an engagement letter, put together a scope of your services, put together your disclosures and what you're responsible for, what the client's responsible for, and come up with something that's going to show that you're doing these services in a expert manner, in a routine manner, and you're providing the same kind of advice from client to client to client. And then, really consider, quite frankly, all the way to the last one, which is, in my opinion, are you really providing a service to your client, or are you helping your client achieve forgiveness that they don't otherwise deserve because your clients expect you to do it the same as you provide tax advice, which is you're looking for the way that they pay no more, no less. But on a clear set of rules and laws, no, right? It's always gray. But this isn't even gray yet. It's like near still unknown. And so do you feel that from an ethical standpoint, you're providing are you providing advice that can be relied upon? So anyways, take this as that. I'm just looking out for my fellow CPAs and EAs and just providing some of my thoughts. And as I was doing this seminar that I presented earlier this week on behalf of Surgeon, these was 2 quick seminars that I probably spent 3 minutes on that I wanted to spend a little bit more time talking to everyone. And remember this too, when ethical issues are put in front of you, then the beauty of putting an ethical situation in front of you is then to go, oh, okay, well then you know what? Thanks, JJ. Then we do need to approach it like this. We do need to write it up. We do need to define it. We do need to do these things so that we stay within our ethics, right? So that's why I'm bringing it up, because, for CPAs, I'm not super familiar with EAs, but I'm assuming it's the same kind of ethics, right? But our ethics are to the level of not just right or wrong, but qualifications, due care, right? Free from conflict of interest. So anyways, I want to protect our profession. I want to protect you. And if anything you took away from this, and if you're going to still be involved with it, on how to actually go about it to protect yourself, protect your client, make sure you get paid, engagement letter, what you would do when you provide a set of services in normal circumstances. All right. Hey, well, thanks for listening. If you made it all the way to here, and if you're involved with it, Godspeed on it, because I tell you what, it's going to be a rocky ride. Even when we get past June 30, it's going to be more to come out of it. And so I would probably just say, buckle up and hold on tight, which I'm sure you're ready to do. All right. Hey, JJ the CPA out.